this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogman, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, how's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. Kind of crazy busy, but believe me, I'm telling you. That's why when at the beginning you're going to see I'm looking all befuddled, it's because, of course, the computer shows us who's in charge, which is not me, and it's like not starting up, but then starting up. So anyway, yeah. So it's kind of crazy, and I have my enforcer here, and I have my little kitten back there that I'm still bottle feeding. Well, you can't see her, but she's back here. I have her in a little crate. So she already have her teeth break out, so I'm little by little transitioning her, but I'm still having to bottle feed her. That was, in case you missed it from my last show, that was a kitten. She was, I'm guessing she must have been 2 weeks old when I rescued her. I found her at a friend's place out in the country. No mama, no siblings, nothing. So I brought her home. Her name is Marnie. And I'm not going to take her out because then she won't want to go back into her crate because she's getting all like, But yeah, it's great though. And my dogs are like looking at me like, what? What is this? Well, what can I say? So yeah, the enforcer, the bottle, oh boy, never that, and of course, this is all on top of my desk. you know, it's like stuff like life gets in the way. Well, I'll just move stuff around, that kind of thing. But anyway, besides that, everything is good. We're coming down into the home stretch of the year. God, everywhere you go, everything is now the holidays. Even if you go into the supermarket, it's like, hey, uh, stacks and stacks of everything pumpkin spice, pumpkin this, pumpkin that. And it's like, there's a little bit too much pumpkin. And then, of course, after the new year, everything goes on super, 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 super sale. And it's like, somebody's caught on that not everybody likes pumpkin spice or pumpkin this. It's like, hello. But anyway, such as it is, when you, as a kid, you have memories of the holidays, like from Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, New Year's, certain things. But I think my memories are going to be, now as I've grown older, all the crap that I would go to the stores and it's like, what? Yeah. So, yeah, that's my rant for the commercialization of the holidays. But c'est la vie. Anyway, let's get on to the good part. The good part is, who is the guest today at Stories of the Supernatural. This is the first time he's been here with us. His name is Dr. R. Craig Hogan. He is the author of 8 books on the afterlife, afterlife communication, and the nature of reality. He is the president of the Afterlife Research and Education Institute, Inc., and Seek Reality Online. He's been the director of adult extension studies at Wheaton College, consultant to companies such as AT&T, Caterpillar, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, USDA Educational Development Consultant at McMaster University, Curriculum and Teaching Consultant at Chicago Medical School, and Manager of Communication at Bank Illinois Company. Dr. Hogan has been a business professor at 3 universities and founder of the Business Writing Center and online business writing school. Among his titles are Evidence Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, You Will Never Die, Answers to Life's Enduring Questions from Science Discoveries and Afterlife Revelations, and What Happens to You in Your Life and Your Afterlife. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Dr. Hogan?
I'm doing great, Marlene. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
On the contrary, it is my pleasure. I'm going to ask you the most obvious. How did you get interested in this field? Was it just something that interested you or a personal experience you had or what?
Well, I turned 52, and at that time, then I didn't really have a belief in anything. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, previous to that, I've been an administrator at Wheaton College, where it's a conservative Baptist college. But I had given that up. I'd given up Christianity. I'd given up everything to believe in. And then when I turned a half a century old, then I started meeting psychics. They just kept coming into my life. Every time I turned around, I met another psychic. And I spent time talking with them, and I realized that there's more to reality than what we see around us. And one of the psychics says, you have psychic ability. And she said, go home and take a deck of cards and hold the cards so that they're face down and put one card at a time on the palm of your hand face down. If it feels like it's warm, that means your senses are that it's red. If it feels like it's cold, then your senses are that it's black. And so I
Okay.
went home and I did that. I went through 25 or so cards and had them in two stacks. We all face down, didn't look at them yet. And when I turned over the pile that was supposed to be cold and was going to be black, every one of them was black. And I
Really?
turned over the other pile that was supposed to be red and warm, and every one except one was red. And so what that taught me was that I do have psychic ability and that there is much more to reality than just what we can sense. And so then I explored it some more and I got online and found that there is a phenomenon called remote viewing. Remote
Okay.
viewing, you can
Yes.
sit someplace and you can see things that are thousands of miles away, things on people's tables or in houses or pictures that people have put up. And so I gave it a try, and on the first try, I was able to remote view something that somebody had put online with a great success. I was able to sketch the entire thing that they had out there. And so I realized then that the mind cannot be in the brain. If the mind was in the brain, I wouldn't be able to see things thousands of miles away just by sitting and concentrating on them. The mind
Okay.
is not in the brain. The mind uses the body and the brain as avatars in this life. And so we're able to do things. But once the body and the brain die, then the mind just keeps going on. The mind was preceding the body and the brain and exists after they have gone. And so then I realized that there is an afterlife. Once I realized there was an afterlife, I couldn't get enough of it. I wanted to read more. And so I read, I had conferences that I sponsored with people coming to talk about the afterlife. And the more I delved into it, the more I realized the fact that everyone should have this message. There is no death and there are no dead. And when we come to the end of this life, our bodies and brains are going to die, but we're just going to go on happily, merrily into a life after this life and have a wonderful life with all of our loved ones and all of the pets that we had on this side of life.
No, and one of the reasons I asked you was, did or if you had had a near death experience, or I'm sure by now you've spoken to people who have had a near death experience, right?
Yes, many people who have had near death experiences. It's a wonderful experience. And when people come out of a near death experience, they're changed people. And the reason they're changed is because they realize the truth. The truth is what makes us different. And so once people realize the truth that we continue to live after the body dies, then their whole lives change. They become different people. And some of them even acquire some psychic abilities. But we don't need to have a near death experience to realize that. All we have to do is take a look at the evidence, take a look at what we know to be true. And anybody who does that, including the many, many scientists now who have done it, come away realizing that the body is only an avatar. It's only something that we use to navigate through Earth, to learn lessons, to grow in love and compassion, and have fun. And that we are going to continue after the body dies. It's just like an overcoat that we take off and we leave in the hallway, and when it's old and tattered, we throw it away. And that we continue to live. And that's what we're going to be all finding when we come to the end of this life. There's nothing to fear. And so I've learned that from the near death experiences that I've talked with, and also from the people I've talked with who are communicating regularly with people living in the life after this life. And now we're having communications commonly. Anybody can have them. And so that shows us that we continue to live after the body dies.
And also nowadays they have so many ways to resuscitate a person that a few years ago they just would have said, okay, we can't save this person. And I've even heard now that before that threshold of what was considered brain dead, that they've even brought people back from what supposedly brain dead scenarios, and they're still okay. Because you always heard, well, the heart can stop and you could still revive the person they are considered alive, but that once there was no activity in the brain, that was it. But now I think they're finding, if I'm not mistaken, that that doesn't always mean the physical death. And
Yes. And
so they're,
up until around 1962, if a person had a heart attack, they were gone. That was
yes,
it. There was nothing to do with them. But now, then after 1962, then people began to become resuscitated when they went into the condition in which their brains were no longer operating, their heart was no longer operating, and they then went into that state, and then they were brought back from it. And that was the first time that it started happening. So when people were brought back from it, about 5% of them have an experience that we now call a near-death experience, in which they have wonderful things happen. They meet loved ones who are now on the other side. They have a sense of an unconditional love from an entity, and wonderful stories about what happens to them. Many of them have difficulty being able to tell them because they're so emotionally involved in them.
sure.
But now we have a whole different perspective on what happens at the end of the death of the body. It's actually an opening. People become then more open into the next life.
Yes, and I could say, and the reason why that back even in the I'm going to use Hollywood as a reference. You know, you would see movies or programs from the 1960s and 1970s, and there was no really like ER. They would just bring you in an ambulance, put you on a stretcher, and hopefully by the time you got to the emergency room, they could save you. But now, you know, you have God, they have defibrillators in places and malls. Besides, if they call 911, the firemen really are paramedics. So that's why I'm saying I think that there's a lot of people that once before they would have said, there's no saving this person now. So I wonder, and of course, what you said about the body being an avatar. And I remember when first they came out with this, I want to say it was maybe in the 80s that you saw more, I think with Dr. Moody about the near death experience. I know that there were some doctors who were saying, no, that tunnel experience is by the brain. It's a brain thing. You know, that's that whole sensation that people describe. That's not, that's just your brain doing its thing. But I've heard that people sometimes will see and overhear things in another room that there's no way they could have if they weren't able to like actually, if them who they are it was had left.
Yeah, so that's very common. So when people go through a near-death experience, they very often will come out of it and they'll describe to doctors what the doctors were doing while their bodies were entirely comatose. They had no sensation in them. And so then they know that the person was aware not only of what was going on in the room, but they also have stories of people going down the hallway and seeing what was happening in the lounge where the doctors are waiting to come into the theater to be able to perform their surgeries, and people who rise up out of the building. And there's one story of a woman who was at Harborview Medical in Seattle, and she was, for all intents and purposes, dead. But when she came back and they revived her, she said that she rose up out of the hospital. She saw a red tennis shoe on a ledge, and the red tennis shoe had a scuff where the toe was, and the shoelaces under the tennis shoe. And the nurses and doctors couldn't believe this. I mean, this is incredible. She's had a dream or something that's happened.
Right, yeah.
But they went out and they investigated. They went to all the windows in the top part of the hospital, and sure enough, they found the tennis shoe. And then we had another story when another person had the same thing happen. They rose up out of the hospital and saw what was another tennis shoe, and exactly the same thing happened. So we know that people, when they are going into the process of dying, when the brain no longer has enough oxygen, then the brain is not fully able to function, and especially memory. Memory is not able to function. when the brain doesn't have
Right.
enough oxygen. So when they go into that state, the heart is not working, the brain is flatlined, and when they're in that state, nothing could happen. They could not have experiences. They couldn't have memories. And yet when they come back, they say, I saw clearer than I've ever seen in my life. I
Mm-hmm.
experienced things. I experienced sounds. I heard people talking. I watched what they were doing. And then they describe it in detail. So that's impossible if the mind was not alert and active and being involved in what was going on. So we know that the mind continues to live after the body dies.
Right. In other words, you could, for lack of a better word, you can see, hear your senses with, even if you don't have a physical body. Because we always think of these things as what allows us, our senses. Let me ask you, I don't know if you had any information on this. I've heard of people sometimes getting some type of transplant from a deceased person,
Mhm.
and they'll either sometimes develop likes or dislikes, even let's say for foods,
Yeah,
unaccountably.
yeah. And they're calling it cellular memory because they have
Mm-hmm.
no other good word for it. They don't know why it's happening that way. We had an incident in which a little boy received the heart from a little girl, and there was a special presentation where they had the little boy come up on stage, and he was going to talk about what happened. And as he was getting ready to come out, he whooped up through the curtains, and he saw the mother of the little girl whose heart he had. And he said,
Okay.
"Mommy, Mommy, I'm missing you
Ooh.
so much." And he went over to her, and he had no idea who this woman was. She had not been pointed out to him before, but he had that cellular memory. In other words, the little girl was intertwined with him because the
Yes.
minds are intertwined. The bodies are not intertwined. It isn't the cellular memory, it is the minds that are intertwined. And so then the little boy was intertwined with that little girl whose heart he had. Another instance in which a woman was going to pass from cardiac arrest, and they put the heart into her from a fellow who had died. And after she had the new heart and she awoke and she became better, and she had this craving for McNuggets and for beer, and
All things McNuggets.
she never would eat McNuggets before. She would never drink beer, and she had this
Uh,
craving. And then she found out the man who whose heart she had died in a motorcycle accident, and he loved McNuggets
there
and
you
beer.
go. That's what I've heard.
Yeah,
That
so
people
the
have
cellular
like,
memory, and it isn't really in the cells. It's called cellular memory, but it isn't in the cells. It's that our minds are intertwined. So we can be intertwined with someone else, and we'll get their memories. Twins, for instance, are intertwined with
yes,
each other, and they get the memories, and they know what's going on with their twin, even though they're thousands of miles away.
I know they've done those studies even of twins that have been separated at birth
Yep, yeah,
and
and
how similar their lives are, even though they have had no contact since basically since birth.
yeah, yeah. And it's because of the fact that we are intertwined. The same thing happens in past life regressions. We stay the individuals we are throughout eternity. So we don't change and come back as another person. We don't reincarnate as another person, but we can be intertwined with someone. So when our life was planned, the planners sat around and they drew frameworks and fragments from other people's lives, and they put them into our life. And so we're intertwined with them, and then we get the memories of them. So when people have past life regressions, what they're doing is they're bringing up the life of that one of those other people whose framework of their life is part of their life. But we stay as individuals. We don't reincarnate. We will stay as individuals for eternity.
Right. And because I know I've had, I did hypnotherapy for a while, and I did past life regression. And a lot of people would ask me, "Do you believe in reincarnation?" And I said, "You know what?" And I know I didn't have it happen to me per se, but I know there's different. As a matter of fact, psychiatrists, people, doctors were using hypnosis for therapeutic reasons, not for regression, and they would have, when people actually saw what later on they thought was a past life, it brought resolution sometimes to phobias, to a lot of other problems that regular, like counseling or therapy hadn't worked on.
Yeah.
them witnessing whatever it was in their mind, something clicked, made them understand,
Yes.
under certain behavior they had, or like again, phobias, things they couldn't explain as to their in their present time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's because their lives are intertwined with that other person. So another person may have had a fear of water.
Right.
And their framework of that person's life is in their life because they're learning lessons that other person didn't learn. And they're having experiences that other person didn't have. But if one of those experiences, they have a phobia about water, then this person who's now incarnated, who is living on the earth, may have that same fear. It may be carried over. And so, as you say, when they find out that that's true, then very often the fear dissipates. And they no longer have the
Right.
fear.
It's like something like all of a sudden now I understand.
Mhm.
It's almost like with that clarification is like, oh, because, I tell people there's a difference between fear. Let's say you have fear of dogs. If you were a child and you got bitten by a dog, you know where the origin of that fear is. But when it's that phobia that you can't, there's no life experience that you could say, well, this happened to me and this is why I'm scared of that, or why I feel uncomfortable in these situations. Unless there's something that it's a hidden memory, but it's very like what you said. I think that the us as in, and I think that's what a lot of people sometimes wonder about. Like when I die, is that it? That's the end of me. No more me.
Yeah, yeah, it's simply not true. And people are coming to realize that because there's so much overwhelming evidence. Now that we have mass media and we can tell the story, so everybody can share these stories with other people. But more important, now we have better forms of afterlife communication. So we can communicate with people living in the life after this life. And now it's commonplace. And we have methods that are being used now that are 98% successful. There's one method that psychotherapists are using, and the psychotherapist puts the person into a state of mind in which they have an afterlife communication with the person for whom they're grieving. And the communications are just wonderful when they go into these in their minds, that as they're in that state of mind, they go on walks with their loved one, they communicate with them, they talk with them, they have all kinds of experiences and showing that they are in fact alive and they're living in another life, they're in another realm, but they're very much alive. It's just like they've moved into a different country, and you can pick up the phone, and you can talk to them. So we know that that's true. We know that the psychotherapists are able to do that now, and we have actually three different methods that psychotherapists, state licensed psychotherapists, are using now to help people have afterlife communications with the people for whom they're grieving, and it resolves the grief in one session.
Yes, and I want to say especially when it's a sudden, unexpected death, that the persons left behind, they want to know, is this person okay? Yeah, that kind of like that could like make them go crazy because your imagination runs wild. Unfortunately, worst case scenarios when it's something along those lines. And I think also sometimes you hear, okay, when we die, we're eternal, but we kind of, how's this, that we kind of lose our identity and we return, whether you want to say the source, back to God, wherever. But the the what made me is like basically it's gone and you just return. But from what you're saying, that's not the case.
That's not the case. It is not true. And we have many thousands, hundreds of thousands now of communications from people living in the life after this life. And what they tell us is that the next realm, the afterlife, what we call the afterlife, is around just like this, except it has none of the negatives. It has eliminated the negatives. There are no negatives there. And as a result of that, then we have wonderful lives with our loved ones. There. And so then we continue our lives there when we go on to the life after this life. So it is very much like this life, only much more wonderful.
Let me ask you though,
Mhm.
do you think sometimes, let's say, let's say, like you said, an initial scenario of fresh grief where a living person can become too dependent on wanting to basically continue relationship with a deceased loved one instead of living their lives, because I could see that happening with
Yeah,
certain personalities.
yeah. Uh, They do not give us enough information to make that possible. So in other
Okay.
words, they don't interfere with our lives.
Okay.
What they do is they will communicate with us. They will say that they're doing fine. They will tell the people on this side of life what their life is like there, but they will not interfere with our lives. They won't, for instance, tell them that they have to expect that there is going to be a stock market crash and they ought to sell their
Right, right. Well, I'm
job.
also thinking of, what we think of as free will and
Mm-hmm.
um if this is, let's say, a husband and wife scenario where maybe you were used to this person, you were making decisions together, and now you want to keep going back, like having, resume the relationship, even though one of you has passed on. And I could see where it's like, maybe for 30 or 40 years, I made decisions with this person, but I could see where, and I understand also what you're saying. It's There's no interference with your free will for whatever it is, good or bad. But
Yeah, and they are very concerned about making sure that we understand that we are immortal, that we are going to be living after the body dies, and that's their main message. They're saying, "I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Don't grieve for me. We're I'm fine. We're going to see each other in the blink of an eye, regardless of how
mm-hmm.
many years it's going to be. We're going to be seeing each other again." Then beyond that, then as far as giving advice or telling people what to do, they will inspire us with information
Okay.
to help us avoid difficulties, to help us to do things in our life differently that are going to make a difference for us. So they do inspire us to do that, and they will communicate about those things, but they won't communicate about things that are going to make a difference, that are going to interfere with our lives. We're here on earth. We've come here to learn lessons, to grow in love
Right.
and compassion, and to enjoy life. So they won't interfere with anything that will help us to keep us from learning the lessons that we must learn while we're here.
Right. Exactly. Like if it's exactly like, you know how they say you're going to do it the easy way or the hard way, but it's ultimately your decision versus, and of course, us being humans, we always want the easy way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and then fear of making mistakes. I can see where, fear drives or inhibits a lot of actions that we could take, because especially depending on your personality, you get scared of, oh my God, what if this is wrong? What if I make a mistake? What if what if, and you never do anything, even if it ends up being a mistake. It's like, oh well, I guess I won't do that again.
Mm-hmm. You learn from
And
it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's part of our role here. Our role is to
yes,
make mistakes and to learn from them and to triumph over them and continue. So that's what we're doing here. So that they won't interfere with that. They know that we need to make our mistakes and go our own way. But what they're sending us is a great amount of love, of assurance that they will continue to love us and will be there when we make it over to
mm-hmm,
the next life. And that's the important message. That's what they want us to have. So then they are not going to be so worried about the nitty gritties, about what happened, why they died or how they died, or these kinds
right.
of things that people are interested in. They're not interested in those things. And so then they're not going to be willing to talk about them so much.
Do you? And I know that in some cases, when you have persons that are missing, and they've been missing for quite a while. In other words, chances are that this person's passed on, but unfortunately, their family doesn't have. I'm not going to use the word closure because I hate it, but they don't have the resolution. They don't. It's almost like, even if they get confirmation of the worst, scenario, but they'd rather have that than not knowing. Have Can that be used in that scenario?
Yeah, so the people who have passed, whose bodies have died,
Right.
many of them will stay on the earth plane for a period of time because they do want people to know what happened. They want to know who the perpetrator was. They want people on this side to know that. So they will. Many of them will stay on the earth plane and they'll try to inspire people to go and find that perpetrator. Psychics are able to get the messages from people who are living in the life after this life about what happened to their lives because they're disturbed by that. They're not going to move on until they have that message conveyed to those who can do something about it. So they may decide that they want to stay on the earth plane for a while. So on the earth plane right now, we have many people who are staying here for a great variety of reasons. They're
Right.
unseen. We don't see them, but they are still here. They're still around us. They can create some problems for people. If people have addictions, if they have
Mm-hmm.
difficulties already in their life, then people who also have those addictions can leave the body behind. They want to stay on the airplane because they want to indulge in those addictions. They can't do it, of course, because they have no body. But what they do is that they inspire one of the people who also has an addiction, who is still alive, to do things. So if it's a person who sets fire, then they're going to stick around the person who sets fires and try to
Right.
inspire them, try to motivate them to set fires, and say, oh, look at that building. Can you imagine what it would be like if that were in flames and the fire trucks were coming? And they try to inspire them. So we do have negative entities, people who are themselves addicted, who have their own sets of problems, who stay on the airplane and they try to influence people who are weak and have the addictions themselves.
Right. And I know that in some cases they'll even refer to them, I believe, as spiritual attachments.
Mm-hmm.
Like that scenario that you just said about, let's say, somebody that's got a problem with alcohol abuse, where, I mean, I know that's a very difficult addiction, but in some instances, maybe somebody that's trying to stay sober, go sober, they find it difficult because they might have somebody, hitching a ride with them that
Mm-hmm.
in life they were, it's difficult as it is, but even more difficult because they might have this influence
Mm-hmm.
of another person that was addicted to alcohol
Yeah.
saying that you don't want to be sober, like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
let's
Go
go
ahead.
down to the corner bar.
Yeah. Let's enjoy ourselves and have a drink. And so they
Yeah.
can't. There is no such thing as possession. So in other
Yes.
words, a person, one of these entities, cannot possess a person, but they can influence them. And for people who are very weak, who have these addictions and can't control them, then it's closer to being a possession because they're so easily influenced. But they cannot possess, they cannot take over a person's body
Mm-hmm.
without their willingness to do so.
Right. It's that, and let me ask you, what happens to the person? I don't know if you, that thinks that that's it. That once you're dead, that's it. No more. That's the end of you. There's no afterlife. There's no survival of the soul or the spirit or anything.
Mhm.
What happens to those people who like it's after death and it's like, oh, what is this?
Yeah,
What do you mean?
they're in for a big surprise. So,
Yeah.
so we have many people who make the transition and they were atheists and believe in nothing. They believe in the soul will continue, and they find themselves awakening on the other side. Now there are groups of people like that, because groups of
Mm-hmm.
people then will band together to spend time with each other in the next round. And so there are people who band together and they still don't believe it, even though they've gone into the afterlife. They can't
Right.
believe that they are living in the life after this life, and they're trying to figure out what happened, what went wrong. But for most people, the
Yes.
people who had no beliefs in the afterlife or didn't believe that was any consciousness beyond the death of the body, they wake up to reality pretty quickly and they're delighted. So they then, when they make that transition and they understand what's happening with them, they're anxious to tell us. They're anxious to come back and tell us about it.
Right. That
There's
I
a
was
whole book.
mistaken about what I
Yeah,
thought.
I was mistaken. There's a whole book by Anthony Bourgeois called Life in the World Unseen. It's a wonderful book and it has vivid descriptions of the life after this life. And Anthony Bourgeois was a priest. He was a Monsignor.
Mm-hmm.
And he had preached against the idea of the afterlife. And he felt so guilty about that that when he went
He
into the
did.
afterlife,
He
yeah,
did say that.
yeah,
Really?
he felt so guilty about what he was teaching when he went into the afterlife that he then came back and he co-authored the book through the medium Anthony Bourgeois. So he gave
Okay.
Anthony Bourgeois this to say, I was mistaken. I should have realized that there is life after this life, and it's a wonderful life, and I'm going to tell the humanity about it. And so he had Anthony Bourgeois write the book, and the book is Life in the World Unseen. It's a wonderful book.
You know what? I can also see it. What you're describing is a very good method. How's this? Um, because I know guilt sometimes can be. like a ball and chain,
Mm-hmm.
especially when if it's something that how's this that you never have a chance to make amends or anything of that nature. If you could ever like kind of set the record straight or apologize
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, to say, okay, I'm I let them so and so know I'm sorry, or by the way, you know what, I didn't abandon you. I got, I died, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's the coulda, woulda, shoulda, and
Mm-hmm.
people feel guilty about it. But here is what we know to be true, and they come back and they tell us that this often. Uh, when the person feels that, they message is already gotten by the person who's living in the life after this life. The person didn't make it to the funeral, and they feel, oh, I didn't make it to the funeral. I couldn't say goodbye. Well, no,
Yes, I've heard of
the
that.
person, the person who is passing into the next life knows that, knows that they would have wanted to be there, but was with them then afterwards, after they had made the transition of the body, spent time with them, got all of the feelings, all of the messages that they wanted to give to the person. So it isn't lost. It is received. And that same thing is true when a person is feeling guilty because I didn't do this, or if I'd have done this, they would have been okay. And that's not true. There is an exit point. There are actually several exit points, but there's one that's chosen. Once the exit point is chosen, then there's nothing that can be done. So it
Right.
doesn't matter whether the person on this side of life could have done something differently or been there or any of that. When it's the time to make their exit, they will make the exit regardless of what happens. Nobody needs to feel guilty. They get the message. They hear you. They every tear that you shed is a tear that they feel. And so then you needn't worry about what they're feeling about what happened, the circumstances of their past, anything like that. It's meaningless. They say, forget about it. Don't worry about that. I love you and I'm doing fine.
What have you come across with people who take their own lives, as far as we said, well, do they come to that realization as far as was this inevitable, or was, I mean, I know sometimes it's a product of mental illness. I know that other time it depends, even addiction. I mean, there's a host of things that could spur a person to do that. But what have you come across in that scenario?
The person's taking their own life is not in their life's plan. So that was
Mm-hmm.
not part of their life's plan. A wonderful medium named Suzanne Eastman has she channels a group of beings called Sanaya, and what they tell her was that suicide is free will gone awry, is what they said. And what it is a person is circumstances in his life that was plotted out, was planned that his life was going to be like this. He would have a tendency in the plan. He would have difficulties he had to wrestle with, and there was a potential that he might decide to take his own life. But the life, taking of your own life, is not in the life's plan. And what happens then is when they get to the life after this life, they're received with open arms and kindness and love and understanding about what they've been through. So there's a great variety of efforts to make them feel better. It isn't a free ride. When they go to the other life, to the next life, they feel all of the emotions of the people they left behind.
Right.
And the emotions of the people they left behind are just draining. They're just dramatic and they're just awful. And they feel them because when you go into the next life, you get the feelings of other people. In other words, we communicate telepathically. So they get all of those feelings. They feel the remorse. They feel the awful feelings that their loved ones are feeling, and they can't do a thing about it. They've made the
Right.
decision
Yes.
on the
It's
other
being
side. They can't go back and console the people. But and worse than that, all of the other people who were over there originally, who were there preceding them, they feel those feelings. So everybody, it's a very sorrowful time. The taking one's own life is not an answer unless it is because they have some debilitating illness or some mental illness that they can't overcome.
right.
And those are different circumstances. But for a person who's having challenges in life, for them to take their own life, it is not a wonderful reunion on the other side. They are received with love, with the compassion, with the understanding, but it is not a wonderful time.
Right. And I know even on the people that are left behind, there's also a great deal of guilt sometimes, or like, you always think, could, did I do enough, or I did, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. So I could think that
Yeah,
communication with somebody just to find out that they are okay now.
yeah, they blame themselves for it,
Oh, sure.
and they feel those feelings. And every day that the person on the side of life wakes up in tears, they feel that they're getting all these feelings. So it is not a solution. It is not a solution. The solution is to encounter whatever the difficulty is, whatever it is that can be changed. An illness, a painful, dramatically painful illness, that's something that can't be changed.
Right, exactly.
That's entirely different. There's a mental difficulty called Lewy body syndrome, in which people hallucinate, and there are things that come into their life, and there are awful things that come into their vision and their imagination, that they live with this Lewy body syndrome. And that is something which somebody can't live with. And we understand that. That's something that is more difficult than a person needs to bear within their lifetime. But for somebody who's just struggling and they're having difficulty with their girlfriend or with their spouse, and they decide, well, I lost my job and this is it. I can't stand it anymore. I'm going to get out of here. That's not the solution, because those difficulties are not going to go away. It's going to be a
Right.
very thoughtful time.
I think sometimes even I think that's even why now there's the do not resuscitate orders on people, especially as they're older. Sometimes it's they themselves against their family's wishes say, I don't want to be resuscitated.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I have a do not resuscitate order, because I'm once the body's done, I don't want to be here anymore.
Right,
I'm ready to go
exactly.
on. I'm ready to go on to the next life. So, but that's at the point at which there is a great possibility the person is not going to recover, and then they can then have that order within their paperwork.
Right, right. And it's again, it's the how can I say, maybe sometimes people at that stage have a better understanding of, like, okay, whether what happens, even if they're not sure what happens to them in the afterlife, they're like, I'm done with his body.
Yeah,
There's nothing, whatever, that I can do with his body anymore.
yeah. And they needn't worry. Nobody need worry about the end of this life. This end of this life is just a painless transition. There is no pain at the end of
Hmm.
this life. So that when a person is making the transition, they feel no pain. They are just here. It's like they fall asleep. They're just here one moment and then they're the next. People are surprised when they wake up and they're there on the other side. There is no pain. There's nothing to fear. So it's an easy transition. Now, the leading up to the transition could be full of pain and trauma and all the difficulties of a car accident, or even an explosion in war. So those
Right.
difficulties are there, but as soon as the person's ready to make the transition, it's all done, and they feel no pain and they just go on to the next life. There's a story of a man named Michael Swain, and he communicated back from the afterlife about what happened. He had been driving down the road with his fiance's sister in the car, and he saw a car coming at him, and the lights blinded him. He couldn't see, and so then it looked like something was going to happen, but he didn't know what. And the next moment, he found himself holding his fiance's sister's hand, and they were rising up 30 feet above the car, and they watched the collision happen below them. They were taken out before the collision occurred, because it was going to be the end for them, and there was no reason for them to feel all that pain. People
Hmm.
don't feel pain when they make the transition. But leading up to it, they may feel, the traumas of leading up to the transition, but the transition is painless.
Right. And I think, what have you come across when you have like sudden, like a natural disaster where there's a scores of people that die, sometimes even unexpectedly? What have you come across with those scenarios?
Yeah, there are people on the other side who have devoted their lives, and they're just people like you and me, and
Mm-hmm.
they've gone to the other side, and therefore their occupation, what they're going to do with the rest of their life while they're in Summerland, which is the next plane of life. And while they're there, their occupation is to counsel people if they come across. So when there are large groups of people who are coming across, then the counselors are there to help them. Then they bring in their loved ones. And the only reason that they're not there is because it's a sudden occurrence.
Right.
If it's not a sudden occurrence, then if it's an illness, then their loved ones are already there. They're actually in the hospital room with them. And they talk about it, and they reach out their hand up in the upper corner and they say, Grandma, Grandma, and because
Yes.
they can see them there and they've come to help them, to usher them into the life after this life. So in those circumstances, then they have people, their loved ones are already there. If there's a sudden passing from this life, then they may not be there, but there are counselors who are there. So during these mass exoduses, there are counselors who work with the people, help them to understand it. They will put them together so that they can talk about what happened to them and they can understand what's going on. And they take care of the trauma that was involved in it and whatever that mass accident was.
Right. Right. Exactly. That I can imagine how what's a fight for survival kind of scenario where you're like trying to save yourself, possibly trying to save somebody in your family or things of that nature. And let me ask you, what do you think of persons who have described, if you want to call it dark near death experiences versus the typical ones that you hear about?
Yeah, there's a very small number, and I think it's something like 3 to 5% of them. Now we have to understand that the near-death experience is only near death. So the person is still in the body, feeling all the things that are going on with the body, all the trauma, all the pain that's going on with the body. And so what they describe then is people who are jostling them around and moving them around and pushing them around. That's the medical team who's doing things to them. Because they're only near death, they're still in the body and they're still getting bodily sensations. All of the other people, all of the 95 to 97% of the people who have near-death experiences describe wonderful
Right.
experiences. They meet with loved ones there. They meet with this wonderful being who is entirely loving and concerned with them. And all of the rest of them are uplifting. It's only that very small number that have these negative experiences, but they're not consistent. It's not like they see a version of hell. I think that there are a small number of them who see what they think is a version of hell. There is no hell. Hell is a mythology that was created by the church in the first century, first and second
Mm-hmm.
centuries of the millennium, first millennium. And it is a fiction. There is no hell. There is nothing to worry
Right.
about.
Right.
Everyone goes to heaven. Everyone goes to Summerland.
I can't remember the gentleman's name, and this story came out a few years ago, and he says, or he had a near death experience, and in his story he says, I was a jerk. He was a jerk. I mean, I
Yeah,
was a jerk, but after he had this NDE where it was dark and everything,
yeah,
in other words, and he came back,
hmm,
was a changed man
yeah,
because it was
yeah.
like, and I'm thinking, okay, were you afraid of the hell part or what happened? But in other words, he had like an epiphany, even though it was a
Mhm.
dark experience.
Yeah, yeah, because it's a near-death experience, and everything that happens to us while we're in the body is intended to teach us lessons.
Mm-hmm.
So he needed that lesson. He may have been given that experience because of the fact that he needed to feel like there is life after this life, and that
Yes.
we can have that transition. And so he needed to feel that. So the near-death experience involves very often things that are teaching people about the rest of their lives. It's changing them, it's converting them, it's making them into different people by the experiences that they have.
Exactly, right. Because that's one thing I've heard that the majority of people who have that near death experience come back changed for
Yeah,
the better.
change people. Yeah. And it's an experience that we all can have, but we don't have to have the near-death experience. All we have to do is to open our minds, look at the evidence that we have, and understand the fact that we all continue to live after the body dies. And we can look forward to our reunions, to the next life, and all of the wonderful things that are going to be happening when we are just now preparing for the life after this life. So we can look forward to it.
And now that you mentioned the belief in hell, I'm thinking there's people that really truly believe in the existence of hell.
Yeah,
And
there's
even if they, even if they really haven't been a bad person, but if
yeah,
they were either brought up or their belief system is that there's a very strict, that they're thinking, oh, I think I'm going to the hot place.
yeah.
You know, it's like, what happens to these people when they find that it's like that was all that's not the case at all.
Yeah, there was a Pew Research study that was done of religious beliefs, and 66% of Americans believe in this mythology of hell. It's an awful mythology. And it simply isn't true, but none of them believe that they are going to be the ones who are going to hell or that their loved ones are. So they realize
Right.
the fact that it is just not something that they're going to experience. But it's a mythology that's falling away, and we have to get rid of it because it's a terrible mythology. So what happens is when they then leave the body, some of them
Yeah.
leave the body and they'll stay on the earth plane because they're worried about what's going to happen next.
Yes.
So they'll leave the body and they're worried about it. They don't want to go on to the next step because they think they're going to go to hell or purgatory, and that's
Exactly.
mythology. And the others, though, that as soon as they leave the body and they've gone on and made the transition, then they're just very relieved to see that that was all a mythology. There was no truth to it. That life continues in Summerland, which is a wonderful realm. It's very much like the Earth realm, but it is much better. It has none of the drawbacks. There are no
Right. None of the yeah. What
never.
happens, or have you come across information on people? Nobody's perfect, and I know there's people that are worse than others, but for the people that are, I'm going to use the word evil, whether they're psychopaths. I mean, evil, and I know there's psychopaths that are just controlling. They're not violent, but
Yeah,
I'm going with predators. The worst that humanity can produce. What
yeah,
happens with people like that? And I think sometimes even that part about the hell for some people is also that how they say this person will get theirs. Like you might escape punishment in this life, but then you're going to go to hell, kind of deal.
yeah.
What
That's
happens with that?
that need for retribution. That's a
Right,
very very
exactly.
human need, but it is only a human need. It is not in our universal consciousness. It is not in the divine that need for retribution. So a person like that, and everybody often, most often thinks of Adolf Hitler or Pol Pot or Stalin,
Right,
or someone who's responsible for millions of deaths of people. And when they bring up those people are actually just on some stage of development in their eternal lives. So right now they're at a very, very primitive state of development. They are feeling they are willing to do cruel things to other people. They don't have
right.
love and compassion. So they're at a very low level. They then will, in the next life, then there is a separate level that's below some of them, and it's called the lower level, but it is not a hell. But it is where all of those people are living together. They live together there because of their state
That
of
sounds
mind.
pretty bad.
Yeah, they live together there because of their state of mind. It is not a punishment.
Right.
They are there. They're creating that environment. So then that's a kind of a dark world. It's a dank world,
Yes.
and people are screaming at each other, and all the same things that they did on Earth. Then they're continuing to do there. Then people from the upper levels, from Summerland, then will go down to council. Eventually, all those people will rise above that and will grow out of it. So Adolf
Okay.
Hitler probably by now has started to grow out of what he was doing, same with Stalin and Pol Pot and all of the rest of the villains of the universe that we would say, yeah, we would think that they would be in a less good place. So they are probably now growing up out of that and growing into the upper levels. There is no retribution. There is no
Mm-hmm.
punishment because of deeds done on earth. People have to
Right.
realize that. So you don't have to worry about your child. If your child, for instance, had done something dastardly, even killed somebody else, they are not
Right.
going to be punished for it. That was a
Right.
terrible thing to do, but now they realize that. They're going to go through the process of realizing it, understanding what they did, and growing from it and becoming a different person as a result.
I imagine that for a psychopath, let's go with the description of somebody that has no remorse or no empathy or sympathy. I imagine it's got to be pretty bad if they let you have those feelings back and you realize what you did. That's got to be pretty. Then all of a sudden you realize, what I did, like what was absent from your perception when you
Yeah,
were
yeah,
living. Now you get the full Monty of like a regular person. How's that?
Hmm.
That's got to
Yeah,
be pretty horrific, especially if you did horrible things to lots of people.
yeah, and there actually are two life reviews. So the first life review happens pretty soon after the person makes the transition, and it goes through the major points in their life and shows them what they were doing and helps them to understand what other people were feeling. The second life review is the really intensive one. This one takes longer. They'll go through every major incident in their life. They then
Okay.
will become the other person
Wow.
involved in it, or the other people. They will become them. They will feel the feelings they felt. They will have the thought processes of that other person. They will, for the first time in their lives, they'll understand what other people were feeling when they were doing that. And it isn't a punishment. It's not intended to do anything bad to them, to make them feel bad about what they have done. The purpose is to help them to grow, to understand, to become more loving and compassionate, to realize that what they were doing is having an effect on people they didn't realize or didn't care of what effect it was
Mm-hmm.
having on other people. And so then they will grow from that and they will become a better person as a result of that. And everybody does. Everybody goes through those stages. If they
Right.
did dastardly things when they were on the earth, they will go through the life review and see the effect on other people. And they will grow from that. They will understand what was going
Because I imagine it's like, and let me ask you, as let's say first a soul or a spirit, whatever you want to call it, that's passed on. That,
on.
like you said, you don't have a body. You really don't need a house or any things that we need because of a human body. Do you become like, in other words, the earth plane is like not interested anymore. Thanks.
Yeah,
Like in other words,
yeah. No, life,
all the things that I thought were important when I was alive is like, meh, I could do without that now.
yeah, and that is true. That all the things that you thought were important when you were alive, then they no longer have any importance. So wealthy people don't take their wealth with them. People who had great beauty and were stunningly beautiful don't take
Right?
the beauty
Yeah,
with them. But
the vanity thing.
yeah, but what happens is that in the life after this life, we do have bodies. So we do all the things. It's very much like the earth plane. So then some people, when they wake up, they don't know, realize what happened to them. They're, the bodies are the same, but the bodies that we have are the bodies as we have in our 20s or 30s on Earth. And then there are no blemishes, there are no hospitals, there are no doctors, there
Mm-hmm.
are no old age. Everybody's in their 20s and 30s. And so then they will go through life with the body just like we have here. And they
Right.
will enjoy all the things of the body. They'll enjoy riding in cars, riding boats, they can play ball, they can watch productions, theater productions. They can, if they want to, they can eat anything that they want to eat. They don't have to eat, but they can eat if they want to. If they like smoking cigars, then they can smoke a cigar, but it doesn't have an effect on the environment. In other words,
Right.
smoke
As
does not harm their body and doesn't affect the environment. So all the things that we enjoy on Earth, we will be able to enjoy there and many, many more. So it really is a wonderful life that we're going to be entering.
what happens to persons who die or pass on? Let's say if they're under anesthetic. Let's say they're in an operation, or they're under the effects of drugs, or they're, sudden from one minute you're there and then you're gone. What happens to those people like that? Are they walking around going, "Hey, what happened?"
Yeah, yeah. Uh, the whatever it is that happened to with the body, then immediately ceases. So if
Right.
they were under anesthesia, if they were drunk, and if they were high,
Yeah.
those immediately go away. As soon as they leave the body, because they all have to do with the body, so then they no longer have this effect. So they're immediately gone, and then the person will continue then living first as a mind, and maybe the mind on this side of life for a little while, and then go into the next life. But they'll live without whatever those addictions were, whatever those difficulties were. A child or a young adult who has Down syndrome uh,
Mm-hmm.
then is going to be entering the life in the next life as the person of that age. So they'll be like a child in the next life.
Okay.
And then they will grow to become an adult in their 20s and 30s, a functioning adult with none of the difficulties of Down syndrome. so then that Down syndrome is going to go away, but mentally they are going to be at the level they were, and then they will grow from there to where they
Okay.
become young adults and then adults in their 20s and 30s.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's um and I imagine for the, how can I say it, the you always hear about the especially, I was going to say, for parents that have lost children, um do they grow up
Yes.
in the afterlife?
Yep.
They, in other words, they keep going in their age progression?
Yes, they will. So, and it is some parents don't want to hear that. They want to think that their little 4-year-old child is going to be 4 years old when they get there 20 years later. That it's not, that isn't the way it happens. They do grow
Right.
up. So the little child who goes into the next life lives with other children. There are special areas with other children. They spend time with the relatives, the people who are already there, and they have this wonderful time with other children. It is a wonderful time of learning. They don't have schools like that we have here. They
Right.
learn about experiences, and for instance, they would learn about the history of the United States, and they would actually be able to see the things that were happening at the inauguration of the president or some other activity. But they
Oh,
will
there
be
we
actually be there during that period of time, and they'll be able to witness it. So the schools are very different. But and children who are not born, children who are stillborn or aborted, if the
Mm-hmm.
mother loved that child, then that child is born in the afterlife and grows up there. We have many stories, wonderful stories of mothers who come back to us and tell us that when they were there, we have one story of a woman whose name was Annie Manji, and she communicated with her husband, Dr. Dinshaw Manji, who was a professor at Birmingham University, and he sat with Leslie Flint, who was a medium. And she told her husband, Dr. Manji, on the side of life, that when she got there, there were two children there, young adults actually, and their names were Sybil and I'm going to forget the other one's name, but Peter and Sybil. And
Okay.
she said she met these two young people, and they said, "Mom, we're your children." And she had forgotten that she had had two miscarriages,
Okay.
and those were her children who had been born into the afterlife because she had loved them while they were in her womb, and they were born there, they grew up there, and they were young adults when she got there.
Wow. Can you imagine, for some parents, that's like a, the how can I say it? And unfortunately, it's, in this case, it's like you either don't understand it till either you have a near death experience or you're dead.
Hmm.
The comfort of that realization.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Nobody need fear at the end of this life. It is a period of transition into the next life. It's a wonderful next life, and there's no pain, there's no difficulty in the transition, so nobody need fear it.
Dr. Hogan, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. It's been wonderful.
Yeah,
I know you have several books out, but I want to ask you anyway, are you working on any new ones?
yeah. I'm working on videos now. Trying to
Oh,
get the
okay.
word out, and at seekreality.com. At seekreality.com, we're putting together videos because they're getting to a greater number of people than the books do.
Right, the Seek
So
Reality. Okay. Which I was going to tell
seekreality.com.
you for my podcast listeners is seekreality.com is where they can find information on everything that
Yep,
you're doing.
yep. Everything that we're doing and all of the latest that we have about the afterlife, afterlife communication, and the nature of reality, what this reality is that we're living
Okay. And as far as like further explanation, because I know your books are on Amazon,
in. Yes.
but are these videos that you're putting out, is it the same information so that people, maybe if they haven't read it, it's just easier, or in a, more compact format?
It's different. So
It's
there's
different.
different information. Yeah. Some of it is similar, but
Mm-hmm.
most of it is different. It's the latest things that we're learning now about the life after this life, and we want
Okay.
people to realize what the truth. And so we are putting it out, what we are finding out now about the afterlife and the life that we can live in this life with our loved ones here and have a wonderful life and look forward to the end of this life.
Exactly. And unfortunately, there's a lot of fear around that.
Yeah.
Again, Dr. Hogan, thank you so much, and I want to wish you the best of luck in all your
Okay.
projects.
Thank you, Marlene. It's been
Take
wonderful.
Likewise. Take care.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye. Wow. Let me tell you, isn't that a wonderful message? I think it is. And unfortunately, what's I know there's people out there that say, "Oh, they want to think, okay, once we die, that's it, it's over." Or there's others that, again, they have religious or just beliefs that there is that you're gonna get punished if you didn't live a life the right way. You're going to, there's in other words, St. Peter's gonna turn you away at the pearly gates. Gonna say, no, you're not on the list. Okay. um but and to, I think personally, I like his message of what he's saying. And that's why I even asked him, because I think that's also where a lot of people get caught up with the idea of hell. It's like, okay, what about these people that get away with stuff? Because yeah, you hear about all these murderers or whatever they are, that they get caught. They die either by police, or they go to trial, and they sometimes, in some cases, depending, they get a life sentence or death penalty or whatever. But anyways, but there's some type of what's the word I'm looking for? They get theirs. But then you think, okay, there's others that they never get. Nothing happens to them. All right. Like I said, as a matter of fact, in other recent cases, now that they're finding out with these DNA about all these cold cases, by the time they actually get around to solving who was the perpetrator of these crimes, the person's been dead. And by the way, not all of they, yes, some of them, they've come and they find, yeah, the person was already went to prison for some other crime. But in some cases, they have found, which I've come across in my research, they're older, and in some cases they don't even bring them to trial because they're so elderly. Because I'm talking cold cases where the forensics and DNA research wasn't around when the crime was discovered. And hopefully, there's something that they could be done as far as to pull DNA from. But or they find out, yeah, that person, he died 10 years ago at the age of 80. And what's really astounding is that a lot of them, what's the word? And I'm talking here about pretty bad people. They kind of like, rehabilitation is not the right word, because it's not really rehabilitated, but they kind of realize, I'm gonna get caught, or they just stop. They kind of become normies on the outside, I imagine, because I don't think some of the things that you hear about what they've done, you're really a normie just pretending, but you realize, I don't want to spend my old age in a prison cell, or I got lucky up, when I did these things, and I'll just, just quit while I'm ahead. But bottom line, they never get any type of punishment, let's use that word, for what they did. So I think a lot of people sometimes see the hell part in the afterlife as, well, you know what? He wasn't brought to justice here, but now he's going to get his. But despite everything, I still like what Dr. Hogan was saying, where they're going to put him in a room with others like him. That's got to be pretty bad. Because remember, most of these persons are very self-centered, and I mean, yeah, that's got to be pretty. And whatever their proclivities were, it's got to be difficult that you don't have any normies around you. All you're surrounded is just others just like you or worse. It's like, what? And I know he said that it's not meant as a punishment, but sounds like one to me. Even though there is, and it is, what he's explaining is that this is not a forever thing. I guess that you go to rehab, kind of soul rehab, which and I tend to I think I tend to agree with him on this thing about hell being made up as a way to like keep everybody in line. You know, hey, you better not do that, because if not, you know what? And and everybody I'm sure has heard of stories where, I mean, this was people that, let's say, 1,000 years ago, whatever, that maybe you were a real piece of work, and as you're getting old and you're thinking, oh, I know where I'm headed, you would go and have pay. As a matter of fact, pay. Hey, you want to put a new tower on that church, or but I want you to get all the nuns in that convent over there to pray for me. In other words, they started, all of a sudden they would remember all the stuff they had done. It was like, oh, you know, and it was like they paid and prepared and asked for prayers and masses and things, and because they were trying to head off, because even though they might have been anything but good, they still couldn't escape. That's how deep seated that belief was, in that after you died and you led a sinful life, how's that? There's only one place you're going to, you know, that kind of deal. And by the way, we're not talking here, remember, in some cases, the sins didn't have to be extreme. They didn't have to be like, oh, you murdered somebody. I mean, there was a lot of things you could have done that were not that extreme, and it's like, yeah, still, you're sorry, no, you're going downstairs. I don't know. I want to think that our eternal us has something to or an existence, of course, beyond our bodies. And if you want to look at it as a learning thing, and that there's always, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, not hope, but that it's not a, because you know what? Sometimes you think of people that have done horrible things, let's say murder, and I'm not gonna say all the time, but sometimes you'll hear the life history was pretty bad. They experienced severe child abuse, uh, physical abuse, mental abuse, spiritual. In other words, they kind of were like, by the time they actually were out of childhood, they had been created into monsters. And you think, okay, yes, we all have free will, but how much of this could have been avoided if this person or this child would have been born into different circumstances? The big question, right? Because I know there's many people that experience very, very difficult childhoods, but they don't grow up to kill other people. But then again, it's like a combination, a convolution of personalities and experiences, and what comes out of it. I'm not going to be the victim anymore. I'm going to be the victimizer, that kind of thing. And then, you turn out to be a scourge on society. But then you think, okay, well, maybe when they do a life review on this person, they were created into being the worst version of a human being. By the way, and I don't want to use as an excuse for people that have done horrible things, because like I said, there's people that endure very difficult upbringings. And when I say difficult, I'm being nice about it, and they still don't go on to do those things. They and then of course, and then we have, like, again, we have others that suffer from some type of mental illness that, God. And then there's the, just good old psychopath or sociopath. I mean, but yeah, I agree with Dr. Hogan. I like his version of the afterlife, very much so. Anyway, guys, I hope you liked this interview with Dr. Hogan. I apologize. I know his audio was not the best. I didn't realize it until we were into the interview that it was like, oh. And but I'm gonna see if I can clean it up a little bit. And please subscribe to the newsletter that I have on Substack, mppellicer.com. You can go there and find links to it. Also, MiamiGhostChronicles.com. We have that's it. That's it. All these guests now that are going to be coming in, or for the new season, season 17 of Stories of the Supernatural. I've got a lot of interesting guests lined up. A lot of new things that are happening. You know, nowadays, so many things are UFOs. Not too long, like a couple of days ago, they had a 6.4 earthquake on the Richter scale off the coast of Cuba. And I was like, and I heard that there were places in South Florida that felt the tremors. And I was thinking, what is going on? As far as I'm sure you've heard of the theory that Atlantis is off the coast of Cuba, and that at some point, and I believe this was part of Edgar Casey's um, information that he gave out about Atlantis, that at some point it was going to rise up off that area. And when I read that on the news, I was like, what? I'm telling you. Anyway, bottom line, there's so much interesting stuff going on. So again, go to mppellicer.com, go to miamighostchronicles.com, go to erie.news. All those things you're going to find on the site. Videos, links for the videos, links for the podcast or the MP3 files, the articles. I've got all my articles on there. All those things. And before I go, she's already meowing. I was like, oh, mama, I have to be quiet. And this is my girl, my Marnie. Hello. And you know what she wants? She wants this. She wants this. Oh boy. Yes. This is what she wants. And I've been trying to transition her little by little into some kitten food. Look at her. She's like, oh. All right. Okay. Now you're swallowing air. Okay. Let me go make you some. Anyway, guys. Okay, let go, let go, let go. Whoa, she's hungry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. She's ready to. Anyway, guys, I hope you like this. And now this interview, and I've got a lot of interesting guests. Maybe I need to go find a pet psychic to interview. So please, thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll see you next week. Oh boy. Yes, I like you too, you crazy girl. Take care.